Welcome to the Onyx Report, a program that critically analyzes the experiences, histories, and perceptions of black males in American society. I'm Dr. THasan-Johnson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Fresno State, black male advocate, and black male studies scholar. In the program, we examine current events while engaging concepts ranging from institutionalized anti-black misandry to gynocentrism from a black masculinist perspective. Our goal is to remind people of black men's humanity. Call in after a half hour to the show at 310-928-7733. All right. Welcome back to the Onyx Report with Dr. THasan-Johnson. It is January 15th, so we will be doing two shows. I want to alert you guys to a change in format. So we have the 15th today is our second show of the month. On alternate Wednesdays, you can find me doing a live show, video show on YouTube. You can find my YouTube account. Just look for Dr. THasan-Johnson, and make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and you will be alerted to when I do my live shows. Those will be alternate second and fourth Wednesdays. So every week you can check in with the Onyx Report there. So to jump in today, we have a great show. We have a great guest who's a station mate of mine. I've been on his show a couple of different times, as a matter of fact. He's also here on Interlight Radio. And I'm going to introduce him in a moment, and we'll have a conversation about a topic I think that's really crucial, especially in 2020, in regard to black men and boys, and that is how we define happiness and what that means. But as you know, for those who've been following me for a minute, you know I start the show with some current events, and I do have a few, so I will try and jump in here and get through them because I think these are important to know about. The first of which, and I want to start on a positive, is about attorney Bryan Stevenson. He's the author of the book that inspired the film Just Mercy, that's currently out in theaters. And the article I want to point you to is on people.com. It's called All About Just Mercy's Bryan Stevenson, the lawyer who has overturned 135 death row convictions. This is a brother who is dedicated to his craft, and the craft is justice. He uses that via the law, of course, but the film even depicts him as a really dedicated black male lawyer. And so I start with him because those of you who follow me on social media know that in the last couple months I've started a hashtag. I actually started a couple. One is Sacred Black Masculine. And the reason I started the hashtag Sacred Black Masculine was to highlight what is often buried under the rug, swept under the rug in regard to black men, and that is that we do have examples of humanity, of purity, of goodness, of justice, and those examples tend to be swept under the rug, and there's a hyper kind of emphasis both by the media and by consumers to only focus on the negative. So the film Just Mercy, well acted, by Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx and a number of others. They did a beautiful job. The story is based on the book by Stevenson, although it looks like the film story itself was written by an Asian and a white guy. Nonetheless, it's still an important movie to see. I had not actually had a chance to read the book, but a good colleague of mine had, and he said that the role played by the actress who also plays Captain Marvel, Brie, I think that's her name, I'm sorry? Brie Larson, thank you. It didn't look like that character was very pronounced in the book, according to a trusted colleague. So look into that for those who are interested. But nevertheless, definitely focus on Bryan Stevenson's work and see how you can support him. Check the article out. And also support the hashtag Sacred Black Masculine. I also created Black Fathers Play, hashtag Black Fathers Play. So I have some posts up where you actually see black fathers spending time with their sons. And there's documented research to suggest that black men actually engage their children more than other racial groups. So the hashtag is only reflective of what's happening, even though it's not something we immediately associate with black men. Next article up is on the sexual abuse allegations against a Sarasota pastor that goes back decades. This is on TampaBay.com. and you can find it. It's an article about Bishop Henry Lee Porter, 72 years old, facing 2 counts of capital sexual battery of children under 12. Apparently, he had been molesting young boys, most particularly, and he served as pastor for 45 odd years. The reason I bring this up is not only to inform you, because I don't at all deny that black men, are involved in all kinds of situations, or are the aggressors as well as the victims. But the reason most of my media focuses on the positive in regard to black males is there's already plenty of stage room for the negative. That's actually where the conversation starts. So you'll notice that I tend to overemphasize the positive, not because I'm ignoring the existence of the negative, but because it already has quite a bit out there. And that's also why I don't generally do a whole lot of information on black women, because again, or women in general, there's already plenty of stage room for that. There's just not a lot in regard to, kind of conversations about black men that I think need to be had. Now, I mentioned Henry Lee Porter because you do have this pastor who's abused his position, his authority, and taken advantage of scores of boys over the decade. And the title of the article is about the sexual abuse allegations. And usually you'll find article titles that involve the term rape. I contrast that with another article on colotv.com about a Reno woman, Lori Wilson, 48 years old, who apparently was sentenced to 3 months in jail for having sex with her 16-year-old foster son. And we don't know how far back that interaction goes, but I frequently do report on women who are found to have committed acts of rape. And the reason I do so is because you'll notice that none of the titles actually involve the term rape, not even sexual assault. The overwhelming use of terminology in these articles is that they had sex. They had sex with students, they had sex with foster children, and so the term rape is not used, sexual abuse is not used, abuse at all is generally not used. And so I contrast the two stories to kind of show you how, black men and men in general are often depicted in regard to sexual allegations, but women are always kind of presented with an air of plausible deniability that even when sentenced is a problem. And the sentencing is extremely light. She got 3 months. So imagine a 48-year-old male having sex with his foster daughter and getting 3 months and not even having the term sexual abuse or rape used in the title. All right, so that kind of reporting ends up being a problem. Next up, we have an article that you can find on themarshallproject.org entitled How We Investigate Mississippi's Modern-Day Debtors Prisons Program that Affected Hundreds of Poor Workers. The article is written by Anna Wolf and Michelle Liu, and it starts out with, the tip we got at Mississippi Today seemed a little unlikely. A woman in state prison was also working at McDonald's and not voluntarily. But sure enough, we found Dixie D'Angelo, a woman with court-ordered debts of $5,000 because she damaged a friend's car. She'd been sentenced to something called a restitution center, where she worked 4 different restaurant jobs to try and earn enough to pay off her debts and get out of jail. So what we have is the kind of use of the old idea of the debtor's prison. And if this is precedent for poor black folk, especially women, it would go hand in hand with black male incarceration in a very dangerous and detrimental way. So look up themarshallproject.org, kind of follow it a little bit, see what you can find about it, because that's a dangerous precedent, particularly for poor people who are coming out of generations of lack and underdevelopment. Also, we have, thanks to NBCnews.com, Jay-Z goes to bat for Mississippi prisoners and files federal lawsuit. The rap mogul sued the head of the Mississippi Department of Corrections and the warden of the state penitentiary Tuesday on behalf of 29 prisoners who say the 2 officials have done nothing to stop the violence that's left 5 inmates dead in the past 2 weeks. Says the deaths are a direct result of Mississippi's utter disregard for the people it has incarcerated and their constitutional rights. You can find pictures of the prison. There are unlivable conditions, rampant, mold, lack of cleanliness. It's just, the conditions are ridiculous. The prisoners are freezing. It is inhumane. If you actually get to see the pictures, I suggest you gear yourself up before you do. I appreciate that Jay-Z's taking this role, but again, I've said this before, much of the time in Black America, we end up treating our celebrities as government because we often don't find government as accessible and useful in defending our rights. So shout out to him for supporting that. But also look into what's happening to many of these prisoners in Mississippi. And this is not just in Mississippi. This is just where the article kind of allowed us to kind of step in on what's happening. There's also an article on AMNY, AMNY.com, about 6 Rikers Island corrections officers indicted for smuggling drugs into jail. You can look into that article. This is also emblematic of something that I think has been happening on a wide level. It says allegedly, 6 New York City corrections officers found themselves in handcuffs Tuesday for drug smuggling on Rikers Island. The alleged dirty half dozen were among 21 individuals indicted for the scheme to import and distribute marijuana, synthetic marijuana, or K2, and the narcotic Suboxone, I might have pronounced that wrong, into jail facilities on the island since early 2019. So look into that, amny.com. Let's see. We have a story coming out of Oakland where sheriff's deputies with guns drawn have evicted homeless moms from the Oakland home. This is on ktvu.com. This has been all over the internet, so if you haven't seen it, definitely look into it. I want to give a special shout out to my boy Denmark, one of the brothers out there providing security to those black women. Usually those brothers are fairly unsung and deserve to be acknowledged. He's been doing this for quite a while. And you have those brothers out there protecting activists as well as participating in their own activism on behalf of the black community. So look into that article if you're not familiar. Let me see. There's an article up that is on flip.it/S2CXMV. I know that one's difficult. I guess that's the shortened URL that I could find, but it's on black women facing a widening kin gap. And the article is basically about how black women by 2060 will find themselves without very much kin. And the reason I mention this article is that part of the problem with it, and those of you who follow me on Facebook know my concerns about this, I've written on it, is that articles such as these exacerbate the problem by really, ignoring the elephant in the room. Right. So the article is about black women who will be alone in 2060 and so forth in terms of being without kin. But what the article overlooks is that the reason that they're alone is mainly because black men don't live as long. We're dying, early. I've talked about this in terms of the 10 leading causes of death and how black male deaths are significantly higher, even while still in the womb, believe it or not. But definitely before the age of 65, black men die in much higher numbers than black women. And it's generally age-related conditions that we tend to find black women dying of. And I don't point this out as a negative to black women. I usually bring up gender to point out that this bifurcated reality between black men and black women suggests that some problems are not just black problems. They are distinctly black male problems, and we need to be unapologetic in looking at that. So dig into that if you're interested. I also have a post up on that where I go into more detail with the National Academy of Sciences and point out the data specific to that. Let's see. I posted a couple weeks ago on the 1.5 million black males missing, and one of the responses I got on social media was the frustration that the 1.5 million, because it was so much larger than the articles going around about the 64,000 missing black females, that somehow there was something wrong with that, and that I needed to change the subject or shift the number. The reason I bring this up is because nobody should be able to tell you or dictate the terms of the conversation when it comes to what's happening with black males because they're uncomfortable with it for whatever reason. There are 1.5 million black males missing due to a number of different conditions, and I really don't think that even includes those that are missing because they've been kidnapped and taken and put forcibly into the sex trade or the forced labor industry, and I'm not even talking about incarceration. Those things need to be spoken up full-throatedly, and they need to be spoken about unapologetically, despite what others' comfort zone is in regard to that kind of thing. So again, I have a post up about that. And lastly, I noticed that a brother of mine on Facebook, I won't reveal his name or any inside information, but he posted in a private chat about how frustrated he was about how much money it was said that he needed to have and how he needed to look in order to be considered attractive. So this is a blog piece I wrote some I think a couple years ago now. It's called How Big is Too Big? When is Too Much Too Much? And basically what I point out in there is that, you hear constantly about men being told they need to have an exceptionally large income, a number of college degrees, they need to be over 6 feet or 6'2", and they need to have, maybe even a very large penis. So I went to the data, because that's what I do. I try to emphasize that. So I told him, in the blog piece I wrote that 3.9% of the male human population are over 6'2", right? Only 3.9%. So if you're told that you need to be taller than 6.2, don't sweat about it, because there aren't that many people. Also, that 10% of black folk earn over $89,000 a year, and that's by household before taxes. So really, if you're talking about more than 100,000, 112, you're really talking about 5% roughly. So at the end of the day, that's already going to be an issue. I pointed this out on social media as well, that I've updated the numbers in terms of degrees conferred by race and sex. I have a chart that I use from 1976 to 2017. Black males have gotten half the degrees that black women have. I've included certificates and associate degrees in this. So there's about 6 million degrees that black women have gotten. Black males have gotten about 3 million. And that is in contrast, of course, to white men who've gotten about close to 22 million and white women who've gotten nearly 30 million. So black males find themselves on the bottom of that, and there's not a lot of us that have in that respect. And then lastly, in regard to penis size, I point out that the average size for an erect penis, according to the data, is about 14.2 centimeters or 5.6 inches. So what's my point? My point is, if someone tells you need to be over 6'2", make over 6 figures, you need to have several college degrees, and you need to have a 12-inch penis, let them go search for what they're looking for, because based on the data, they've already put themselves in a population where they're looking for a fraction of a fraction. So don't lose any sleep over that, fellas. Just some useful information to hopefully help you kind of regain your center. All right. So finally, moving on, I'd like to welcome my station mate. This is my brother Sauron. He's a spiritual teacher, mentor, life coach, author, energetic healer, lecturer, and yoga instructor. Alumni of Aquarian Spiritual Center. This is where he and I met back in, 95? Probably about 95, 96. I think 95. Anyway, studied ancient wisdom of various spiritual philosophies for over 25 years. As an ardent devotee of Sri Sri Amritananda Mai Devi. Did I pronounce that right?
That's right.
Okay. I was about to turn that over to you real quick, but I tricked into it. He's certified Reiki and hypnotherapist and provides spiritual, personal, and relationship coaching services. Sauron is an ordained priest of the Sacred Order of the Sons of Ra. So his admirers appreciate his humble approach, unique ability to assist others to remember who they really are and learn how to live in the present. He relates using a combination of ancient wisdom, life experience, formal education, and dedication to life purpose. He illustrates in his message the ease at which individuals can reach their goals when they learn to free themselves from attachment and surrender to the universal energy within themselves. This allows us to live our lives based upon self-inspired vision, belief, and purpose. He conducts weekly spiritual classes. I think he's going to get back to doing so on conference calls on Wednesday nights. He's an author of The Book of Light, Daily Words of Inspiration to Brighten Your Day, and host of Journey into Self every first and third Tuesday, 7:30 Pacific, 9:30 Central, 10:30 Eastern. And you can find him on www.sa-ra.org. So www.sara.org. Welcome to the Onyx Report, brother.
Thank you, brother. Your check is in the mail for that.
That's right. Now I would interview you about your degree in the funk, but I don't think we have enough time to really get into the details of that. So the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because of your unique take on ideas like happiness. But before we get to that, as usual, I like to give people a sense of who you are, who my guest is, where they've come from, how they got to where they are. So if we could start, tell us about where you're from and who Sarah is.
All right, I'll do that. I just wanted to make a quick observation about the information that you shared in your introduction. From what you elucidated, and I'll just have to say, I appreciate the sharing of this wisdom and knowledge from the black male advocate. So
you are the one that gave me that term. I got to put that out there.
Absolutely. But yeah, it sounds like a lot of sisters are going to be alone based upon that data that you shared.
Yeah, you gotta open up and engage people for who they are.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself, man. Where are you from?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay.
Which was interesting because, for one, Chicago, Illinois, I was born in the South Side. Chicago, Illinois is a place that is and has always been quite segregated.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, in my early upbringing, there was a significant time. Well, actually, yeah, there was a significant time where I had never even encountered a white person, which shaped my consciousness, in addition to the fact that my father was in the Nation of Islam, which afforded me the opportunity to attend Temple Number 3 and hear the philosophy of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which also had a significant impact on shaping my consciousness at an early age.
No doubt.
Which has, continued to shape my consciousness into the present moment.
No doubt. Okay. You're okay. So you started to grow up. You grew up in Chicago. You started out at the Nation of Islam schools. Tell us about what happened from there, educationally, athletically. What happened?
Well, a couple things. So, from my exposure to hearing the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, developed in me a strong sense of who I am as a black person, as a black man. He, of course, taught that the black man is the original man, that black people are the original people of the planet, that black people are the ones who contributed the arts and sciences and the wisdom teachings throughout the world. And of course, he taught that as a result, black people, being the original people, are superior. So that was the frame of reference from which I started. I learned to read at an extremely early age. My parents would teach me how to pronounce the alphabet, and I would end up extrapolating the sounds from each of the letters and then trying to pronounce words on my own. I ended up learning because when they corrected me if I was wrong, I would remember it. And so after a short period of time, I was able to read by just reading billboards and anything. I would try to read everything that I came across. And so I ended up learning how to read that way, to the extent that I knew how to read before I even went into nursery school. So then I started reading.
Okay.
And so I read the Muhammad Speaks, which was the precursor to the Final Call, which also further shaped my consciousness.
Absolutely.
As a child, from an athletic standpoint, I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house when my parents went to work. My grandmother was an ardent baseball fan and always watched baseball when she wasn't watching her stories.
Mine too, for that matter.
Now, in Chicago, however, the stadium in which the Chicago Cubs played didn't have lights. So despite the fact that I lived on the South Side, as did my grandmother, where you're supposed to be a White Sox fan, she didn't care. She was equally rooted for the Cubs and the White Sox because the Cubs were always on TV in the daytime because they didn't have lights at Wrigley Field at that time. So I became a Cubs fan, and of course, I developed a deep and abiding love for baseball, which continues to this day. So when I wasn't watching baseball, I was playing baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And okay. I play baseball still to this day.
That's right. So when did you move out to California?
So my parents got divorced, I think in 1966, or actually they got separated, which ended up resulting in my mother moving me and my sister out here to California, which was an interesting experience in that when I ended up going to school, it was complete culture shock. My mother had us living in Sylmar with my aunt, which at that time was primarily white. So I would encounter white people for essentially the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, an extreme shock. But because of the fact that I grew up with the perspective that the black man was superior, that black people were superior, it didn't affect me the way it would have affected black people who didn't come from that type of perspective. So I always looked at myself I continue to look at myself as being superior. And so when people would say and call me the N-word, I thought it was just out of their ignorance and not knowing how to pronounce the word Negro.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I knew that I could read and they couldn't. I read the whole semester full of books when I first went to school within the first 3 weeks of school and didn't, and I had read everything that there was to read.
Mm.
While everyone else was like struggling to read the first book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you continued to play baseball. Did you end up going to school playing baseball in terms of college?
I didn't play baseball at the college that I attended because we had a very racist head coach who only allowed 2 black people on the baseball team.
Wow.
But I did play in this collegiate summer league where I competed against college ball players, AAA baseball players. I also played in this scout league, which was called the Southern California Baseball Association, where the scouts ran the teams. From that, I ended up playing with getting seen by the California Angels, and ended up playing in their organization for some time.
Okay. Now, what ended up being your chosen profession in terms of that?
Well, so I went to Cal State Northridge, where initially I majored in physical education because I felt like I was going to play baseball, and then if I didn't play baseball, then I'd be a baseball coach. That's what I thought. I ended up breaking my ankle and had to make the decision as to whether or not I would take off the time to dedicate myself to getting back in shape so that I could pursue a baseball career, or whether I would hunker down and focus in on my studies, given that the baseball career is not certain. So It ended up being that after making that assessment and noticing how difficult the physical education classes were, and then looking at the return on investment and looking at the salaries that baseball coaches and instructors or physical ed teachers would receive, it didn't seem like the return on investment would be worth it, for the type of study I would have to put in to get that degree. So at that point, I decided that I would change my major to a business major, and then as I evaluated the different options in the business major, I determined that the best fit for me would be a double major in finance and economics, which ended up leading to my current occupation as a bank examiner.
Now, see, a lot of people don't seem to know that, but when you really look at the data from the National Center for Educational Statistics, black males tend to go into business more than any other field in undergrad. And when you get to like the doctoral level, they tend to go into either medicine or law. So black men go into very practical fields of study, despite how some people tend to think that we don't. So you seem to be an example of that as well. You went into business, and now you went business and finance, and now you're a bank examiner. That's powerful. So part of the reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you about a particular approach to not only happiness but spirituality as a whole is because one of the things I'm hearing in the last few years is, black men really trying to define happiness, trying to find a way to not only express themselves but also find space to be accepted, to be treated well, to be appreciated. And so there's all kinds of conversations on the internet about what to do to find that kind of happiness. I'm hearing people talking about getting your passport, traveling to other countries. I'm hearing people talking about becoming entrepreneurs. There's all kinds of different examples of what people are doing to find and be happy. And this is particularly important for black men because, when you look at the history, particularly for African American men, what you see is a history fraught with difficulty, with stress, with, all the kinds of issues that send us to an early grave. It's not accidental that we have a short lifespan compared to other groups, including our own women, right? So in that search for happiness, though, a lot of it is on what I can buy or where I can go. Now, please describe your spiritual approach, and then we can get into how you would approach happiness or contentment.
Okay. First of all, what I would share with the audience is that the search for happiness is as a result of the fact that we as spiritual beings are coming from the spiritual realm, wherein we have a connection to the all. We have a connection to the divine, because that's what we are. Upon being born into the physical realm, the conscious awareness of that connection becomes lost. And then when we begin experiencing the physical realm, what we're looking for is to be able to reestablish that connection. That's the desire for happiness. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to be able to establish our connection with the divine, which is the source of eternal happiness and joy. But we don't know that. That's what we're looking for. We just know that we want to find happiness, but we don't know where to find it, which ends up resulting in us looking at it in anything that we can find it. And so any experience that we have that results in happiness, we feel like we need to continue to pursue that. Or if we've been conditioned in any way, which we are very much conditioned, to believe that certain things, certain accomplishments certain acquisitions will lead to happiness, then we will go throughout our lives in pursuit of those things under the illusion that upon attaining them, we will find happiness.
Well, as a matter of fact, it's extremely pronounced because I'm born in the 70s, child in the 80s, young adult in the 90s, right? So I grew up with all of that 80s and 90s R&B music. I grew up with the movies and the films. I was told that happiness would be when I found the woman. Mm-hmm. And then Cosby told me that when I got my degrees that I would be successful and that I could own a brownstone with multiple stories and I could marry a lawyer, and that was it, right? Happiness came in terms of the media that groomed me and my generation. Happiness was to be found in who I mated with and what accomplishments I made. And one of the things I tended to find was that even if I was one of the lucky few who accomplished what I was setting out to do, I didn't feel the way I thought I was supposed to. My relationships didn't quite work the way they were supposed to. And even when they kind of did, I didn't feel the way I thought I would feel. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And now I have students that graduate, for the small percentage that actually do make it through and graduate with their degrees, who expect to be the next big thing in whatever capacity, who 4 years later are working at Target. And I've had a number of students call me, not even just students, but I've had numbers email me, reach out to me, and tell me they're on the verge of suicide. I talked about this on my last show. What would you say about that entire process of growing up, believing that happiness is a certain kind of set of things, and then dealing with the frustration of what that means, whether you achieve it or not?
As you and I have talked about, what those experiences create, what those influences create, what the programming, if you will, creates, is a expectation, which is a key word, an expectation that those things will result in happiness. Mm-hmm. We know that from our spiritual study that expectations, however, are the source of disappointment. Mm-hmm. Because what they do is create attachments in us which are based upon the illusion that they will result in happiness. And so invariably, since it is impossible for any of those things, which are things that exist outside of ourselves, which are not the sources of any kind of eternal happiness, any kind of happiness that lasts, then we end up being extremely disappointed because we have gone through the majority of our lives with the expectation that the attainment of these things, accomplishments, will result in happiness. And so then when we've attained those things, achieved those objectives that we had set out with the expectation of happiness, then there's a deep sense of disappointment because of all the effort that we've exerted into attaining those goals.
Now, did you experience that? Because I can imagine as a bank examiner, you're doing all right. Were you happy? You'd achieved your goals, you're accomplished, you're doing your thing. Did you come to grips with this moment where you found that happiness, was more elusive than you thought, or was this something you always kind of understood?
To be honest with you, Brother Hasan, I never really bought into the illusion that those things would bring me happiness. The only thing that may have come close to that was I did have a strong attachment to having an ideal relationship. Mm-hmm. And I felt like if I had the ideal relationship, I didn't believe that it would make me happy, but I wanted it and felt like I would get some happiness from it.
Mm-hmm.
That distinction makes sense. So I didn't think that it was the source of happiness, but I really wanted it because I felt like I would get some happiness from it.
Well, you were ahead of me, man, because I think between Apollonia and Claire Huxtable, I was kind of had some expectation that I would meet someone like that. So you were ahead of me.
Well, that's not to say that I didn't want, because I had pictures of Vanity hung up in my room as a child, along with Jane Kennedy and other beauties. So, and I have had experiences where I've had relationships with very, very beautiful women, but I also paid attention to my experiences with them, and so I came to the conclusion early on that it was not going to bring me happiness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So expectation as the source of strain, of difficulty, of unhappiness. Talk a little bit about why. What is the problem with expectation? Because we're taught that you need to focus, you need to plan, you need to perceive a goal, you need to expect to reach it. What is the problem with expectation?
Well, so I think there's a distinction to be made between planning, visualizing, and projecting what we want versus the expectation. And I think so. The expectation is that, or the problem with expectation is that when we're in expectation, we're trying to dictate how it comes, right? Because the important thing that we need to recognize is that what we're really beyond the thing that we've placed the expectation on, what we really want is the happiness. So it's not so much the object that we're placing it on. We want the feeling that we're going to get from it, right? But the problem is that whatever feeling that we get from it ends up being temporary, but we think that it's going to be a lasting thing.
What do people do though?
That ends up being unrealistic. Go ahead.
So what do people do when they find that the things that they're often striving for make them only temporarily happy? They give them a momentary bliss. Like what do you notice that people tend to do?
Well, they'll feel like, well, maybe it was the wrong one. So in relations to relationships, then the conclusion would be that, okay, well, obviously I found the wrong person. So if I find the right person, then I'll find happiness, or
everything will fall into place. Yeah,
everything will fall into place if I just find the right person. Or, this house isn't big enough. I need a bigger house. If I just get the bigger house, maybe that'll make me happy. Or I need a nicer car or a nicer job, right? And so attachment ends up becoming like a drug, right? To where you feel a sense of high from the achievement of it, the attainment of it, but then we realize that it didn't last. And so we seek more.
Well, what's interesting about that too, though, is as men, one of the things that we find ourselves responsible for is other people's happiness too, right? So when we think about, okay, I want to be this person's lover or husband, I'm going to have kids. It's acceptable for us to become responsible for buying someone else that house or helping someone else achieve whatever it is that will make them happy. But we are told that will in turn make us happy. So it's all. So it's not even just the things we desire. It's how our desires can tie us into this idea that we're supposed to help other people meet their desires, and that will make both of us happy. Can you speak on that a little?
Okay, brother. That's programming for one, and that's a programming that does a couple things. It creates, again, an unrealistic expectation and burden on men, and since we're on the show with the black male advocate, it places an extreme burden on the black man because of the statistics that you shared at the opening of the show about the income disparity that exists for black males, right? And so, as you were discussing what the requirements that our women have of us, then it places, if we believe that it is our responsibility to make them happy, then it becomes almost an insurmountable goal for both. So it creates an unrealistic expectation and demand on the part of the women, and it ends up being a carrot that you can never reach as a man. And so that's just from a social and economic perspective where it creates an unrealistic expectation. Okay. But beyond that, from a spiritual standpoint, it is impossible. No one can make another person happy. It is not the responsibility for another person to make another person happy. Right? And so
now I want you to hold right there for a second, because that's something that I really want to put an exclamation point on, particularly for black males of all ages, for young men who are conceptualizing their manhood, for men who are trying to reach expectations that they and others have of them as men. That what you just said was incredibly important. If it's not possible to make somebody happy, can that not be interpreted as a liberatory thing? Can that set me free if I can actually realize not only is it not my job to make someone happy, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
So if it's not possible, can that take a weight off my chest? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, it certainly can take a weight off your chest, because the part that is important to focus on is that it is our responsibility to attain our own happiness. Okay. And when we realize that is really our only true responsibility, then yeah, absolutely it's liberating, because it is only possible for one to attain happiness for themselves.
So if you're dealing with someone who expects you to make them happy and they're always upset that you haven't, and I'm speaking particularly to men that may find themselves in these situations, regardless of the relationship, because this can happen at work, this can happen, it doesn't even have to be just an intimate relationship. It can happen in all kind of ways. You're saying you could actually set yourself free of that stress by just accepting the fact that it ain't possible anyway.
Well, absolutely I do. And so I don't engage with people who expect me to make them happy.
And how do you, what's one of the easiest ways to determine very early on if you're dealing with someone like that? So let's say I'm out on a date. It's a blind date. Someone else hooked me up with it. A friend of a friend. She and I get together. We sit down for dinner for the first time. How can I assess what I'm dealing with and how to avoid that?
pay attention to their languaging.
Okay.
As you're listening to them, and it's important for a man to listen to a woman, so do that. Right? So listen.
Okay.
As you listen to the type of words that they use.
Okay.
Listen to determine whether or not they are people who take responsibility for themselves.
Okay,
or
what do you mean?
Whether they acknowledge the fact that they are responsible for the results that they've had in their lives. Listen to determine whether or not they recognize that they have created the experiences that they've had in their lives.
Okay.
Listen to determine whether or not they recognize and understand that they are responsible for their happiness, or whether or not they use victim language, blame, take no responsibility for the circumstances that they find themselves in, right? Okay. And so you can easily identify those things if you're paying attention and listen. And so what's important for us to do is to make a point not to do is to have our desire be so strong that we don't hear that and are unable, therefore, to make a distinction about what that person's level of self-awareness is.
Okay.
Okay, and so sometimes our desire is so strong that we make poor choices, wanting to fit a square peg into a round hole and try to make someone fit the type of person that we want. Okay.
Well, I generally contend that black males have often been socialized to accept what's presented, to adapt themselves to what's been presented, not really to screen or assess. And I've said this before on other shows, or to even have a list of what it is they're looking for as a kind of compass, in terms of relationships. We tend to be told that in certain respects, we need to adapt to what's presented. We need to, accept what's there and be happy it's been presented to us at all. So you're saying that there's actually another way to go about that, where I actually pay attention, but I pay attention for a purpose. I'm paying attention to what's being said to assess if this is something that I even need to engage in. What would be an example of a red flag? You know what I mean? Same scenario, you're at a dinner, it's a first meeting, it's a blind date. What would be an example of a red flag?
A red flag is when you hear someone constantly blaming, complaining about their circumstances, and saying it's someone else's fault, whether it be something that they experienced at work, or as they're talking about the relationships that they've had, that they blame the failure of their relationships exclusively on their relationship partners, that they acknowledge absolutely no responsibility or part in the failure of that relationship, that they feel like there's nothing for them to improve upon, that they have noticed no recurring patterns in the circumstances that they've had. They haven't noticed that they are the constant, and that if they, if it seems as though their perspective is that it's just because all the people that they've encountered were bad people, but it didn't have anything to do with their choices. Mm-hmm. It was just that, all the men were no good, and they're looking for the right one. Right.
It's an interesting kind of programming that I think we've been subject to, from Walt Disney movies to the barbershop, where it to me seems common practice for men to take responsibility for other people's happiness and blame themselves when that hasn't worked well.
Well, sure.
Right? So,
everybody's heard the term "happy wife, happy life," right?
Right. Exactly. So, and I remember even older men used to tell me as a a young boy, again in the barbershop scenario, they would tell you, if she's not happy, you need to, it's on you, right? The onus is on you to go figure it out, to go make her happy, to go. So I think in many of these situations, when you describe hearing someone doing a lot of blaming, a lot of accusing, and this might even be your first conversation with this person, and you're listening to this, I think what men tend to do in many instances is to say, okay, well, I need to be the exception. I need to be the one that proves to her that men aren't like this, and I can make her happy. What's the problem with that?
Knight in shining armor to come and rescue them.
Yes. What's wrong with that? What does that do over time?
What that does is gives them the opportunity to shift blame for their circumstances, so they never grow, and it creates an undue and impossible burden on the man to do something that he cannot do, which is to make another individual happy. So it invariably is going to cause some great conflict if the woman thinks that it's the responsibility of the man to make her happy, which is impossible. So she'll get frustrated when that never comes to fruition. He'll get frustrated because he's doing everything that he could possibly think of doing, even everything that she says. If he did everything that she says that she wants, she still will not be happy because it's impossible. So he will get frustrated and resentful, which is going to end up causing great friction ultimately.
Okay. So what can men in particular do to first define and find this happiness? What do you suggest to me? Because I know you counsel people regularly. What do you tell people they need to do?
Well, first off is to realize that happiness is not to be attained anywhere outside of oneself. The source of happiness is not in the attainment of material things. It's not in the attainment of money. It's not in finding the right person. Right? And so we have to go into a self-exploration to identify who we are, to realize that we are divinity, and we go through a process of removing the layers of illusion about who it is that we are so that we can tap into the internal source of happiness. And so it's really a reprogramming process that we have to undergo, and that, and that's what when I'm counseling people, we go through basically that unveiling process. Right. Mm-hmm. And so then it's reprogramming, right? And removing those expectations. And so once we then can realize that we are responsible for our own happiness, and then go into the spiritual journey of identifying that source of happiness and connecting with that, then we become liberated to the extent that we can now go forth and then seek to share happiness with someone who is on a similar journey, mm-hmm. who is also taking the steps to develop a level of self-awareness, on the journey to self-enlightenment, so that then you can share that journey together and support each other in that journey. Then you can have a relationship, because it's about sharing happiness, not bringing happiness to someone else.
Okay. So does that mean that I need to, I need to quit my job? Does that mean I shouldn't travel anywhere? Does that mean I should give up, a nice car and just take the bus? Like, I think a lot of people, have this idea that, in order to do kind of some of the things you're talking about, that they have to live a particular way. Talk about that.
That's an excellent question. So, some people operate under the false impression that spirituality means that you can't enjoy the material world, that we have to give up those things, or some people even will feel like they need to go and live in a monastery or ashram or whatever. And so that's kind of an extreme type thing. But we are both spiritual beings and physical beings at the same time. We are spiritual beings living in a physical realm. So we are meant to experience both of those things, not one or the other, not one at the exclusion of the other. It's just really a matter of prioritization and recognition of the fact that we are spiritual and that everything in the physical realm comes out of spirit. So it's a matter of prioritization and perspective, right? But so it's not that we aren't supposed to enjoy the material realm and the things that exist within it. It's that we recognize what it is for what it is and don't become attached to it, in that we begin to be deluded into thinking that those things are the source of happiness. When we realize that they are not, we can enjoy them, experience them, accumulate them, but we're not attaching to them the expectation that those things will bring happiness to us from more than a temporary perspective.
Okay. So you can still engage in the things in life you enjoy. You just go into it with the understanding that this isn't the source of happiness.
That's right.
So what I own, how I dress, what I drive, where I travel to, those things in and of themselves are not the source of happiness. And they're not even reflective of me.
Right.
They're not the sum total of who I am. So with that in mind, where's the source of happiness? How do you connect to that?
The source of happiness is within. So it is, about engaging in our spiritual practices, such as meditation, which meditation is designed to help us to be able to reconnect with our true self, with our spirit being, by detaching, which is an important word which we need to explore, detaching from our thoughts, detaching with our identification with our physical being, so that we can reconnect. Okay. Through that process, by stilling and slowing down the rate of thought, then it will bring us in alignment with divinity, with our higher self. It's thinking that is the primary barrier between who we really are and the illusory self, or the ego self, that we identify ourselves with. And so as we begin to reconnect, then we tap into that internal source of joy. We tap into that internal source of peace, so that we can be tranquil and joyful no matter where we are. I think one of the things that you were talking about at the outset is that many people believe that happiness requires that we be able to be in a place where we can travel throughout the world and experience different places. But the reality of it is that wherever we go, we bring ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not peaceful where we are now, we're bringing ourselves with us. So wherever we go, if we're not peaceful where we are right now in the present moment, we're going to bring that lack of peace with us. If we're miserable at home, we're going to be miserable wherever we go. There's no place that we're going to be able to find peace outside of us. There's no person that's going to be able to bring us peace and joy and happiness. So it's not about going to some other land to find the right woman that's going to bring you happiness, because happiness is internal. Now, the only distinction that I would make is that it's not the place that we go looking for a partner. It's what we see in them, right? So now it may be that if you go to different lands that you might have people who are not as programmed into this material construct that we live in, that haven't been programmed with all this illusion of attainment of happiness through the acquisition of material things, through finding the right person. You know, next month is Valentine's Day, and so all kinds of money is spent to buy things and take people places, spend money on jewelry under the illusion that those things are going to bring love and happiness. I mean, all those things are highly programmed. I think Brother Jamal had posted something about surveillance capitalism. Mm-hmm. And surveillance capitalism is driven by the egoic needs for satisfaction, right? And so they are like parasites capitalizing on the illusion that the acquisition of material things and sensory pleasures is going to bring happiness, and they make a lot of money on that. And so to the extent that you leave the country and go to places where people have not been so deeply programmed into that whole illusion, then you might increase your chances of finding someone who you can work with, who is more introspective, who does take responsibility, who doesn't place upon you the expectation that you are to bring them happiness.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the word detachment or detaching. Talk a little bit about what that means.
That's an excellent question. That is a concept that can be very elusive and difficult for people to grasp. I recall that probably at least 25 years ago, when I first heard the term from one of my teachers, our teacher, Brother DrTHasanJ, he first tried to educate me on developing detachment. I didn't grasp it then when he was trying to explain it to me, because the way I related to it was like shutting myself down emotionally. That's how I interpreted it. And that's how a lot of people relate to it and process it. It's like they think that, you're shutting yourself down emotionally to where you're not experiencing emotions, but that's not detachment. That's like suppression, which is harmful. So detachment is essentially withdrawing one's energy from it. Okay, and so that's why the practice of meditation is so important, because one of the skills that we gain from the practice of meditation is the ability to detach. Because when we are in meditation, we work to, and I don't want to use the word work, but instead our objective is to detach from thoughts. Mm-hmm. Most people who get frustrated with trying to meditate become frustrated because they think that it is their objective to make thoughts stop coming, to stop the thoughts.
Okay.
Right? But if we try to actively stop our thoughts from coming, we're giving energy to the thoughts, which attracts them. Okay. And so a lot of people get frustrated with meditation because as they're trying to stop themselves from thinking, they get overwhelmed with thoughts, and then they end up becoming frustrated, and then they give up. So the objective is not to try to stop thoughts from coming. The objective is to just observe the thoughts and detach. This is a very important concept. So we just absorb them. We don't give them energy. We notice them. We don't take any ownership of it. We don't personalize it. We don't make them ours. We don't feel anything about them. We just notice that they exist. But take no ownership of it. Don't analyze it. Just notice it and allow it to go, in the same way that, we just notice that there are clouds in the sky, but we don't attach any other meaning to it or other than that.
So it sounds like you're saying that we're not our thoughts.
We're not our thoughts, and our thoughts are not us.
And does that apply to emotions, and how far does that go?
It goes everywhere, because our emotions are invariably tied to our thoughts. So whatever mood that we find ourselves in, whatever emotional state that we find ourselves in, is based upon what we're thinking at that given moment. Right? And so if we find ourselves angry, then just reflect upon what are you thinking about. If you find yourself depressed, what are you thinking about? Right? And so now, if we then are able to recognize that the thoughts do not belong to us, then we become empowered, because we realize that just as we can, with the remote control as we're watching television, if a program comes on that we don't like, we can just grab the remote control and change the channel. In the same way, we can use the remote control of our consciousness to change the channel of our thoughts.
Because the thoughts in and of themselves don't have power.
They don't have power unless we give it to them.
Right.
And we give it power by giving it energy, by paying attention to it.
Paying attention to it, right.
But if we don't pay any attention to it, and they're just thoughts, they're not mine, then they have no power over us. So, that's a distinction. Most people are controlled by their emotions. They're controlled by their thoughts. And because thoughts are random and have no connection to each other, if we allow ourselves to be controlled by our thoughts and be controlled by our emotions, then our life will end up being chaos.
Well, it's interesting you call it chaos, because I think, particularly in this culture we have in the West, we're told that happiness, one, is an emotion, and two, you have to embrace emotion and live by emotion in hopes of even finding that happiness. Right? Even the advertisements we watch, or really most of our media is tied to advertisement anyway, but it tells us that buying a product or living this lifestyle, dressing a certain way, going to certain places, looking, all of these things that we associate with how we define ourselves, is the path to happiness. You know what I mean? And so when you say that, if anything, I'm going to disassociate from my thoughts and my emotions. I'm not going to invest any energy into them. I'm gonna actually identify myself outside of those things. That seems to go against what we're promoted to do at every moment in the day, especially in terms of the media we consume.
Exactly. See, the media is about control. It's programming. Right? They call the people who decide what the content on television is and the content on radio programmers, television programmers. They're programming us. They're programming our behavior. As I mentioned, Brother Jamal posted that article or a YouTube video, which is very, very, very informative, and I encourage everyone to watch that, because it's
surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism. Because all that is about is controlling behavior and predicting behavior, because if they can control our behavior, they can manipulate us into buying what they want us to buy. Remember Pokemon Go?
Okay.
When Pokemon Go came out, the first thing that came to mind was that was a social engineering experiment. It was more than that. It was a social engineering program. What did we observe people doing when they were playing Pokemon Go?
I don't remember too much about that. What was it?
Pokemon Go was basically a program game that people could download into their phones.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I remember that. All right.
Everyone was trying to find where the Pokemon was.
Right. My son was doing that, yeah.
Collect the Pokemons, right?
Right.
And so the Pokemon would show up at a park, or a Pokemon would show up at a store. Right? People were so absorbed in Pokemon that they were oblivious to making any kind of decisions. They were going wherever Pokemon told them to go. And people were going there. You would see crowds of people gathering wherever the programmers wanted them to go. So if they wanted them to go to a store and they had an advertisement for them to buy something, or would send some subliminal message to them, they were making people go there. And advertisers were paying the makers of Pokemon Go to get them to send people where they wanted them to send them to.
All right.
Now, how does that relate to what we're talking about? People were being controlled by their thoughts and their emotions because there was external stimuli that was influencing their thoughts, and people were not paying attention to their thoughts. People were not in control of their thoughts. Therefore, someone else was be able to control their thoughts for them. And because people lacked any level of awareness of it, people were being controlled. Now, when we are able to detachment helps us to develop a level of awareness so that we end up noticing. So if we're detaching from our thoughts, then we're not giving it energy, and we're making it a point to not allow thoughts into our consciousness. That develops in us awareness so that when thoughts do enter into our consciousness, we become aware of it.
Right.
And so then we can make a decision as to whether or not we want to accept that into our consciousness. If that benefits it, does this thought benefit me or does it not? If not, detach from it and let it go. Or maybe this is something that I want, but the point is that we're making a conscious decision about it. Right?
Okay. Now we
are not making any conscious decisions. Now, thoughts again affect our emotions. And so if we are aware of the thoughts that we allow into our consciousness, then we're aware and in control of our emotions. We're in control of our thoughts. And so when you talked about how society programs us into believing that we should follow our emotions and that we should give energy to our thoughts and allow our emotions to make our decisions. Some people even say that we should empower our emotions and some nonsense like that. But that's backwards. And the reality is if we operate in that way, then we are basically allowing ourselves to be controlled by things outside of us. Okay, and so the sequence should be the other way around. We should be in control of our thoughts. We should be in control of our emotions. And by us being in control of our thoughts and being in control of our emotions, then we are in control of our actions and we are in control of our circumstances. Because whatever we allow ourselves to think about, we create. What we think about, we bring about. So we are creating based upon what we're thinking about. So if somebody else is in control of what we're thinking about, then we're creating a reality for ourselves that we don't want. We're creating a reality that someone else wants for us.
Okay. We got about 5 more minutes where I want to, talk about this. But I think part of what I can pull from what you're saying that I think, will be helpful to a lot of people, particularly black males, is that you don't need to believe in this notion that, whether it be, how much you can attain or how much sex you can have or whatever, none of those things in and of themselves are the source of one's happiness. Now, that's not to say that you can't travel, you can't have sex, I'm not saying none of that. I mean, do enjoy life, however you decide to do that. I think all I'm saying and what I'm hearing you say is that you can do those things, but if you do them with an understanding of where happiness does and doesn't actually come from, that changes how you carry yourself. It changes your stress level. It changes how you deal with the world, because you're not waiting for those things to have the effect on you that you might have been taught to believe they're supposed to have. And right. You don't have to rely on that. You don't have to wait for that. You can actually just be in the moment. And also, you can also defend yourself from other people's expectations and assumptions. You know what I mean? You don't have to. You don't have to wait for other people's thoughts. You don't have to base your sense of who you are on what other people think. You can actually just be.
You can just be. You don't have to be affected by anything that anyone says, by anything anyone does. You don't care what people think about you because that's not your problem. So, like you said, it becomes extremely liberating because you're not dependent upon anything outside of you to bring you happiness, nor can anything outside of you affect whether you're happy or not. You don't have to allow anything to affect you at all, either positively or negatively. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the benefits of spirituality is that we can just be and not be affected by anything unless we allow it. Mm-hmm. We become empowered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And that in and of itself,
to engage with. You know, you don't have to allow anything or anyone to do anything to change our state.
Right. And that in and of itself, that realization is power unto itself.
Absolutely. So we can be at peace no matter what's going on around us. We can be at peace no matter what other people do. It doesn't have to affect us. And we don't have to go into guilt about anyone else's state of being because we're not responsible for it.
And that in and of itself is a barrier to even shaming tactics or any of that, because you don't give that any energy.
Right, because I didn't make you mad. That's under your control.
So other people's emotions are not they're not your fault. They're not into your purview. Other people's actions are other people's actions.
That's right. You have nothing to do with it.
See, I think the way many of us have been socialized is that we have to take responsibility for other people's, emotional and financial and so on and so forth well-being, and we make ourselves responsible. And I see a lot of black men, to the point of contemplating death, hold themselves accountable for such things. And I would like to see, I'd like to see us be able to let that go. Now, we're going to have to close out here. Tell people where they can find you and find out more about what you do.
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Sauron. That's 2 words. So you'll see me. You can reach out to me there. You can connect with me on my page and instant message if you want to reach out. Also, you can reach out to me on my website, which is Sauron, www.sa-ra.org. If you would like to have a session with me, to be able to talk to me, go to my website, again, www.sa-ra.org, and you can set up an appointment for some free consultations. And if you want to go further, we can make arrangements for consultations. Brother Dr. Hasan had asked me for some resources that I might be able to give you to assist you on your journey. And as I thought about it, I recognized that I could give people books and recommend books to read, but I don't think that it would be ultimately the best way to serve people, because some of the books are going to require some extensive study, and some people aren't going to be able to grasp it. So the best way for me to be of service to people would be for me to be able to work with people directly to help people to be able to grasp these concepts, because I wasn't able to grasp it on my own, and it took a long time. And so, but I have gotten to the point where I can help people grasp those things and be able to understand themselves better by working directly with me. And so,
okay,
that's the thing that I can recommend. So do please go to my website and set up something with me, and because I really, my purpose is to help in our awakening.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you for letting me interview you. Check out Sauron's Book of Light. You can check that out on Amazon if you're interested. Go to his website and definitely check out his show every first and third Tuesdays here on innerlightradio.com. And I will see you all very shortly. Remember, I'm broadcasting every week now, so I will be on either Innerlight or YouTube every other week. So check me out next Wednesday on YouTube on a live show, same time, 5 p.m. Pacific, on my YouTube channel. All right. To everybody out there, thanks for joining the Onyx Report. See you soon. Peace.